Well, we have all our panel members present. They are Dr. Jean Renouf, who we've heard from earlier, Mr. Andrew Kaye, the Community Engagement Coordinator for the RFS, who we have also heard from, but two new folk are Kris Newton, the Manager of Mountains Community Resource Network, and Frank Tamsitt, the Chief Security Officer for our own institution, CSU. I might ask my first question of Frank. Frank, given your background and your role at CSU, could you tell us what your experience has been in working with emergency services and community groups in the context of disaster?
Thanks very much, John. As stated, I've got a sort of varied background, primarily within the Army, but then coming across through Department of Primary Industries to Charles III, and it's given me a number of different views on disaster response and the community's role in it. At Charles III, I'm responsible for protection of people primarily, and assets and information, and part of that is our resilience framework and our crisis management. Charles III is really interspersed right through the regions and really recognises its place in the community and its potential and actual role in supporting that and achieving that sort of clear social purpose. We've been able to employ that most recently through support to the community through the Ugara flooding event and provision of emergency accommodation and services to a large number of people at short notice on our campus at Orange. We saw every bit of the good and the bad, I think, of the current frameworks through that process, and I think the key enabler right across the board, but in particular with our response was people. The people within our community and within the local community generally, their ability to band together in relatively ad hoc groups in order to achieve extremely essential services in very short time frames was key to success. That was enabled right through from the leadership of the university, understanding its role, its requirements to support the community in that way, and it was understood right down to those who were on the ground. The key barrier, I guess, in delivery of that was an effective framework. We certainly saw the lack of that framework on the outside in trying to liaise through government and through community in order to provide these services effectively. The lack of a clear groupings and tasks regarding who was doing what and who to contact in what role, and I think that's been clear right across the spectrum. Obviously, SES was the combat agency in dealing with those floods, but they were not equipped, trained, nor did they have the capacity to deal with the people side of the problem. And there was no combat agency in effect. There was a coordination cell as such, but it wasn't effective dealing with that side. We can't, as a university, affect that in any meaningful way, apart from our continual engagement. However, we can affect our own response, and the lack of a suitable framework to support those on the ground was also found lacking on our side. And that's part of our mission as a business, as we all are in a regional area, is to band together to make sure that we can provide that response. There's a number of measures we're putting in place in order to improve that. We're looking at a simplified, streamlined and incident agnostic framework, dare I say it, all hazard. And I know that was controversial previously, but as a university that can counter all manner of crisis, we need a single all hazard framework that can cover us from a ransomware attack through to crises on our campuses and then crises affecting the general community. We simply don't have the economies of scale to develop different systems for different hazards. We're looking at employing specific crisis risk assessments to inform our responses to these and ensuring that we plug these in with the current knowledge that's held across the local emergency management committees and other areas. We're focused right through on supporting those on the ground rapidly with resources at our own level, and in order to have all the systems enabled for our own staff to support them, for example, to allow provision of appropriate overtime payments, provision of rostering services, and all those things that go into making a response effective. We're rebuilding campus-based organisations. Obviously, our campuses are interspersed with and part of the community, and we, having gone through COVID and a number of years of reformation as a dispersed and large organisation, we've lost a lot of that community feel and a lot of those formal avenues at the campus level to engage specifically with the community. So we're looking at rebuilding that to enable a community-centric and coordinated response. Finally, we're ensuring that that effective liaison can occur. Obviously, different communities, it's going to be, we know that it's going to be different organisations that are effectively going to be coordinating the response. So we can't apply a top-down model in order to integrate with communities. Orange is going to be different to Bathurst, different to Wagga, different to Dubbo, and certainly different to Port Macquarie. And we need to use the development, local development avenues that we already have to ensure that we're plugged into the correct organisations in the correct communities so we can get that information out readily. That's the bulk of my answer to that question. But I did have something I also did want to raise because I noticed it hadn't been mentioned today, and I thought, well, why don't I do Home Affairs some good publicity and mention the Security of Critical Infrastructure Act? It's a piece of Commonwealth legislation, and it's requiring all sorts of things from what it's terming critical infrastructure, and that's a lot of what we're talking about today. So it covers the electricity, gas, liquid fuel sectors, water, essential financial services, food and groceries, freight, broadcast, health, and higher education and research. And there's a whole lot of requirements for that. It's built specifically around combating foreign interference, cybersecurity issues, supply chain issues, but finally, and a big one, natural disaster and its impact on those infrastructure sectors. So there's a whole lot that's required of those organisations classified as critical infrastructure, but one thing that's coming through this year is a requirement for completion of risk management programs and business continuity plans in accordance with the spec that Home Affairs is determining. And that's happening over a couple of tranches, but the first ones will be, for those food, groceries, supplies. That's going to be required by the middle of the year, and going to Home Affairs. So there's a lot through that critical infrastructure piece, and certainly at the university level, we recognise our classification under that, and recognise that it basically gives the government the ability to compel us to support and to secure and prepare ourselves for possible events through the future. So I certainly think that's overwhelmingly positive, and it'll be interesting to see how it's integrated with state initiatives.
Thanks very much, Frank. Could I move on to Andrew? Andrew, is a representative of a government-funded organisation. Could I ask, does the government actually prioritise the type of work that you do in a disaster situation? And if so, what are 2 or 3 of the high priority activities that you are aware of, and what grounds are given for them being prioritised? And in what ways could the community assist you in meeting those objectives?
I need a whiteboard for that question. So I guess in the first part, the government doesn't prioritise what we need to do, except for the fact that our charter is to protect life and property and the environment. So first is life, second is property, third is the environment. So in that space under Section 44 of the Rural Fires Act, we as a collective can draw from interstate and intrastate resources to deal with the fire at hand or the emergency. So I guess that's the simple answer to that question is that's our priority, is life, property and the environment in that order.
Okay, and the involvement of the community in assisting you with that is
Our involvement, our expectation of involvement in the community in that space is to be aware, situationally aware, to have a thorough understanding of what's going on around them, and to be prepared and to act collectively for the greater good. So if you're asked to evacuate, you evacuate. If you're asked to shelter in place, you shelter in place. But I guess when we reflect on the disaster, we hope that there's been some preparation done prior, that things the simple stuff is done, the clearing of gutters, the raking of leaves, the removal of the wood fire, your internal combustion fire, the timber's moved away from the house, and those simple things are done. What we're discovering, and sadly what we discovered from the Black Saturday fires was 173 people had perished, and of those the majority were within 100 metres of their home. So they were either fleeing from their home or trying to retreat to their home when they were impacted. Right. And we want, obviously, that to never happen again. So our education and our advertising and our current advertising is based on living bushfire prepared. So, we're sort of nudging our messaging towards people understanding that it's a shared responsibility. In the Blue Mountains we have 47 fire trucks. We've got 30,000 houses. It's not going to happen. So, the responsibility is, if you choose to live in an area like the Blue Mountains or in a country area or wherever it is that, close to the natural environment, you need to take responsibility in that space as well.
Thank you. Kris, could I move on to you? So in your experience and role in disaster management and recovery, what have been the things that have most frustrated you in the job?
Oh, how long have you got? So perhaps a bit of background would be helpful. MCRN is the peak body for the community services sector in the Blue Mountains. So that covers the community sector itself, but also, councils, state government agencies like health, education and so forth. My day job in that role is to encourage networks, collaborations, collective impact initiatives, chair interagencies, and some other things that I do in terms of communications, conduit and that sort of thing. But since 2013, I've been involved in recoveries. So 2013 and 2019-20 onwards, chaired the Health and Wellbeing Subcommittee of the Recovery in the Blue Mountains, represented the Blue Mountains on the Regional Recovery Committee, and I also sit on the Local Emergency Management Committee as a permanent invited observer, the only one I know of in New South Wales, actually. So that's kind of the 30-second version of the background as to why I've been involved in this process. And I guess I'd like to say, what Jean, Ellie, Renee et al. Said today is that the mantra that we hear is that recovery and resilience need to be community-led, and I'm all over that like a rash. Absolutely it should be. Unfortunately, that's not our experience of various government agencies at various levels in the past. It's been frequently top-down, not bottom-up. It's been a cookie-cutter type approach where they think they know what communities need and they come in and consult with us, which is telling us what they're about to do to us. Absolutely, Jean. But ultimately, the most frustrating thing is that in my community anyway, I describe MCRN as being a bit like the spider in the middle of the web. We are the network. And we have the list of who's who and needs to be connected to in an emergency for the recovery. But we're not resourced to do that. and community sector organisations are asked, in addition to the pressures that they're already under, so after a whole series of disasters, including COVID, the pressures on my member organisations who deal with homelessness, DV, youth, the list goes on, emergency relief, financial support, all of those kinds of things that people are struggling with day-to-day cost of living and just managing, is that they're asked to do all this recovery and resilience and community building work in the absence of any support or resourcing to do that. I think that's personally a wee bit unfair. And having been doing this since 2013, we're feeling a bit on the weary side. So does that answer the question?
Thank you, yes. John, I really enjoyed your opening remarks today. Can you tell us why you think connecting is such an important part of disaster resilience?
Yes, sure, of course. In a way, I think it's self-explanatory, because probably if you look at it deep within inside us, we all have a longing for connection. And we can probably look at it a different perspective. It's really interesting. Already on a panel, Frank said about one of the most important assets in the process were the people. Andrew mentioned the role of community interacting with the RFS. And you mentioned the role of working together in collaboration. So all of us, express differently the same thing, that we're essentially social animals. And when it comes to large-scale unprecedented disasters, we cannot do it on our own. However, I think personally, when I look at connection, I look at it at 3 different levels. The most important to me is the inner connection. So coming from a place of groundedness and being able to intervene in a space of emergency, in times of crisis, from a place of deep peace. The second aspect is connecting with other people. And as we have mentioned here, it is intrinsic part of any crisis response for all sorts of reasons, practical reasons, spontaneous reasons, emotional reasons. We get, information, resources, support, mental health support, and the likes from others. And finally, connecting with our natural environment. And the word environment is particularly misplaced because it puts us in the center, but we are part of. So, connecting with country, really connecting with country, provides us, with obviously resources, but also meaning to the way we live our life. So, yes, social connection is a need as much as we need water and food, and is also a must in any, I think, elaborate response and recovery process.
Thank you. I have a final question that I would like to throw open to the whole panel, so perhaps, Jean, you could take first bite at it. If there was one action that people went away with and did after today to support their disaster planning in their region, what would it be?
No pressure. One action. To me, it really comes back to pausing, like truly take in what's happening to us collectively. It's not just a disaster or a series of disasters. It's a lifestyle change we're talking about. We really need to rethink and reorganize our societies. We're not just firefighting. We need to rebuild differently. So to me, it's like each of us, have this kind of not only responsibility, but probably human need to pause and reflect on those 3 past years. We've all been affected at some levels, and kind of reconsider, okay, so let's look ahead now, and how do we do this?
Okay. Kris.
Connect with your neighbours, family and friends, because Jean is right. All the evidence says, and all our own research says, and all our own experience says, that the single biggest predictor of resilient individuals, families, communities is connection. That could be at the sporting club or your church or, the RFS shed or whatever it might be. It could be with your neighbours. I haven't mentioned it here today, but we were successful in getting a grant from the federal government, the only money we've ever got for recovery. It's actually for resilience. We've called the Resilient Villages Project, and we're working with some of our communities in the upper mountains, who call themselves the fringe dwellers. They're some often on the edge between one LGA and another. Someone drew a line on the map, and that went through often the middle of their community. To develop resilient communities literally from the ground up. So we're working with the Association of Bell Clarence and Dargan, and hopefully with the Megalong Valley. And the Megalong Valley is a good example here of the mix between business. So we've got tourism, hospitality, we've got farming businesses in that local community. And we've also got people who don't live there, so they're weekenders, they come up for holidays. So it's a very mixed community, and they've got some different ideas about where their priorities are and how they should be planning for the future and being more resilient. But our job is to help them articulate all of that and to develop a process of community engagement and consultation, so that the consultation isn't the government coming and telling you what they're about to do to you, but genuine engagement at the grassroots level. And so that, for me, is the absolute quintessence of village by village, street by street, neighbourhood by neighbourhood. We build community, and that's what gets us through.
Andrew, what would you like us to take away?
Oh, a couple of things. I guess from an RFS perspective, in an all hazards approach, is to know your risk, to understand the risks that are around you and potentially figure out how you can mitigate against them, but understand too that it's a shared responsibility. We can't be all things to all people as much as we try to do, and we live in this beautiful landscape for a reason, and the reason is because we love it, and we need to also be able to protect ourselves if at time of crisis.
Right. And finally, yes, finally, Frank. What can CSU do?
I'm going to be eminently practical to an extent in this response, and sort of throw it at everyone. It's easy to sit back and throw stones at government, and fundamentally it's a wicked problem. Like if it was simple, if we knew what to do, we'd have got it done. This balance between personal responsibility and what government is required to provide is a really tricky one. I think being practical is the best way forward and bringing goodwill. So for us as an institution, but also for others, I think we need to lean into the bodies that do already exist and are already doing good things. A lot of these are community groups, but a lot of them are also, for all their flaws, the local emergency management committees and their regional equivalents. That's where the seats are. The best thing we can do is to be there at the table with goodwill, accepting that there's flaws in the system, that there's a long way to go with the journey, but if we're not there and being as constructive, offering support and cooperating as best we can, we're not going to get anywhere with it.
Thank you. Could I ask you to thank our panellists for their participation?